Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. I'm going to show you an exciting game played between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and 16-year-old Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa from India. This is played in the Airthings Masters, the first of the online Champions Chess Tour events. So it's a rapid play, 15 minutes on the clock for each player, 10 seconds per move added. Let's get on with the game. Carlsen had a pretty rocky start to this event, but in day 2 had caught up considerably. Praggnanandhaa was picking off points in the bottom half of the table, but you know, he'd already beaten Aronian, so not one of the strongest competitors, but still obviously a very dangerous proposition if you can beat a player in the caliber of Aronian. So it's a steady start. It's a so-called semi-Tarrasch, symmetrical pawns so far. Both players setting up with their pawns and pieces in the middle of the board. Classical chess, that's what I like. Pawn takes, and bishop comes out to b5. And here one would normally anticipate knight takes d4, but Carlsen plays pawn takes, so a symmetrical pawn structure, but you could say he's up by one move with the bishop on b5. Nevertheless, I mean, it's debatable whether the bishop is better placed on b5 or d3, and indeed Praggnanandhaa puts the bishop on d6 where it points down here. Both sides castle, and now Carlsen plays one of those little pawn moves at the side of the board, h3, that I really frown upon. If some of my students play these moves, I call them little ears. But in this case, it's a good idea because it prevents this pin here. Because the bishop has come all the way out here, if it's on e2, it's different. But it's important to stop the bishop coming out with a pin. And in fact, Pragg does exactly the same thing, stopping bishop g5. Rook e1. So now play is going to center around these outposts. You know, Carlsen wants to put a knight here. Ideally, later he'd like to put a knight here as well. So let's see how things go. Bishop f5. So if Carlsen is not putting the bishop on this diagonal, then Pragg claims a very nice diagonal for the bishop. It also looks at the outpost here. And Carlsen is the first to get his knight to the so-called outpost. The knight is supported by the pawn and the rook. And certainly black does not want to exchange off that knight. Not yet anyway. With pawn takes, that would be rather embarrassing for black. So rook c8. Yep, rooks belong on open files. Bishop f4 supporting the knight. At the moment it looks very pleasant for Carlsen with the knight here. But actually black's position is really solid and his pieces are well placed. I mean, in particular that bishop on f5. Queen b6 looks very natural move indeed. So putting some pressure here, but also looking down at the pawn on b2. So this is nice play from Pragg so far. Carlsen exchanges off bishop for knight. So that means that black has this so-called backward pawn, but there are advantages to this in that it supports this pawn here. But now Carlsen plays the knight here, attacking the queen, also defends the pawn, and looks perhaps to get into the outpost on c5. So it's all very logical so far by both players. Rook e3, right, so the rook is perhaps looking to swing up the board, perhaps get to the king side, maybe swing across the board here and look down here. So this is a dangerous move. But knight e4 from Pragg, very nice move. Putting the knight on the outpost, obviously preventing for the moment rook c3, and it just looks like a nice square for the knight. So now Carlsen has something of a dilemma. you could put the knight in on c5, but this is going to be exchanged off. And also the queen could come down here. So for example, if knight c5, let's take a look, then that could be exchanged off, and actually black could swipe the pawn down there. Now, white's pieces look pretty good, but the queen can come back, and, well, white has compensation for the pawn, but nothing more. Or black could even exchange and just put the bishop back here. It supports this pawn here, protects the king side. And I think black is pretty solid. That's a beautiful bishop here on this diagonal. And the queen is nice and active too. It's roughly level. So I can understand why Carlsen didn't want to do that. Instead, he played the pawn to f3. Now, that is a controversial move, because whenever you advance the f-pawn, then the king is a bit weaker. So the knight, however, the knight has to retreat, and that gives white more freedom. So knight g5, and now the rook can swing across here, which looks at the pawn on c6. So that's a little bit problematic for black, because this pawn needs defending. Queen b7. The queen comes back, anticipating a rook. If the rook captures, actually, then there is trouble here. So, for example, rook takes, and bishop takes, and that rook is a goner. So bishop h2. So that rook, the bishop rather, was undefended here. So that means that Carlsen is now looking to take this, because now that bishop is defended. So if bishop here, for example, this would be a mistake. I mean, I would prefer to put the bishop on g3, because that leaves an escape square for the king. But in that case, f6 attacks the knight, and then that bishop is undefended and can be taken. So bishop h2 played. So it's all about getting that pawn. So at the moment, things are looking pretty good for Carlsen, actually. But black has trumps in this position. Knight e6, good move. So re-centralizing the knight and put some pressure on that pawn there. Now Carlsen grabs this pawn. That's been his aim over the last few moves. However, it's actually, this opens things up for black. Pragg plays knight f4, which is a good move. My computer tells me it's even better to exchange here first, but no matter. Knight f4. Remember, this is rapid play, and the players haven't got time to calculate. They're playing on intuition. And moving the knight forward is obviously a good idea. So the knight comes in, and obviously there's a massive threat to play knight here. Knight comes back, which cuts off the support for this knight. So bishop takes, pawn takes, and now Pragg plays the knight in to d3. And this is truly an octopus knight, an absolutely splendid piece, supported by that bishop and causing havoc in white's camp, because these major pieces just don't like that knight there. They block the queen, they prevent the rooks coming to decent squares. Well, Carlsen decides very sensibly to exchange off all these rooks, because that knight is really menacing. But still, you know, in this position, I'm sure Carlsen would love to cheat. He would very much like to play that pawn back to f2, just to give his king a little bit more protection. But with that pawn advanced, this is the problem. Yeah, I've put it in yellow now. A sickly pawn, which means a sickly king. Yeah, yellow colour, not good. Doesn't feel healthy at all for white's king. But Carlsen is still a pawn up, so he's going to hope to nurse that pawn into something significant. He plays bishop g3. That is, I think, a very sensible move in order to give the king an escape square here. And it also controls a few squares here, but that bishop isn't the best piece in the world. You know, this one is much, much stronger. Okay, pawn to d4. Well, that is a dangerous passed pawn. At the moment, the knight blocks it, but you never know when that pawn, if the knight moves, could play a huge role in the game. Carlsen's still a pawn up, but Pragg has a splendid initiative here. The computer still thinks that white is okay, but in practice, I was watching this game live, and my thinking was I would hate to be white in this position, because this initiative is so dangerous. b3, and just compare black's forces with white's. So black's pieces are coordinating beautifully, whereas white's are kind of scattered across the board, and that is not easy at all. Queen d2, king h7, that just tucks the king out of the way. King h2, and both sides do that. Bishop g6, for the moment not too much happening, so Pragg is just playing very calmly. And here Carlsen, well, we know what he's like. He is always playing for a win. You know, he doesn't like to back down, and because he always puts pressure on his opponents, we know that that pays off in so many cases. He plays queen a5. He's looking to switch things around, to grab the initiative. He's playing the queen actively. He wants to take a second pawn. Wow. Now, knight b2 was the alternative, just to play very prudently. But, well, I think he would realise that after the exchange of knights, then really, you know, this pawn comes into play, and white could have no hope of winning that position. So Carlsen goes for it. Problem is that allows black's queen into the position. And yes, dare I say it, we have a queen trapped in the permafrost down in the other end of the board, way so far away from the action. And the action is going to be centered around white's king, and really this is so risky. If Carlsen gets away with this, well, you have to take your hat off to him. You say he always pushes things to the extreme, but I can tell you the queen is in Siberia and it's a long way from the action. Queen e3, look at that beautiful centralization, and the queen is edging closer to the king. Here Carlsen probably should play the queen back to a5. Still a long way from where it should be. But Carlsen plays a move which looks like really tricky, really clever, to bring this knight back from the edge of the board into action. But that can't be taken, of course, because of the pin. Looks very clever. But after knight f4, whoops, knight f4, things are looking bad because the knight has found its way to attacking the king. Of course, that can't be taken because after the check, then pawn takes knight and black is just a piece up. So knight d1 hits the queen. Queen d2. White's pieces still look really hapless. If the knight is taken, then the queen comes back, and this is actually just wins the knight here. So knight f2, trying to block out the queen, preventing mate. But knight e2, this knight, wow, what a piece. This is, I think, that definitely the MVP of this game. So now it's spinning in and it's going to help with the attack, and also clears the way is clear for the pawn now as well. What a spot. So Carlsen trying to make room for his king. Queen e1. The queen is closing in. Can Carlsen survive? Queen d7. He's put the queen behind the pawn, but no. The knight swipes the bishop if that's recaptured, if king takes. Queen check, and this is winning on the spot. f4. Queen e3 wins a piece. And if king g4, well, we actually win white's queen. So knight takes. Praggnanandhaa now a piece up. Knight f1 check, and now he still has the attack. That knight spins round back into the middle. It still maintains its octopus status. What a beast. Queen b2. And now a final move. Bishop c2 blocks out the queen, threatens the knight. If knight g4, then, well, let's just take it to its conclusion. Check. The king comes up the board, and knight d5 mate. I wanted to show that variation because it shows that this knight really is an absolute star in this game. Beautifully played by Praggnanandhaa. So after bishop c2, that was the final position, actually. Carlsen resigned. Well, like I said, all credit to Pragg there. Beautifully played. He's so dangerous with the initiative. But actually, this, to my eyes, this was a very classical game. A very classical opening, which Pragg played extremely well. And Carlsen just pushed things a little bit too far. We know it often pays off for him, but not on this occasion. Well, let me just give you a quick update. After 2 days in the Airthings Masters, in fact, Nepo is out in the lead, playing extremely well. It's a very interesting field, actually. Lots of young players like Abdusatorov, Pragg, of course, and Yesipenko. Carlsen is in 5th position. Anyway, do check it out. It's the Airthings Masters. Play continues over the next few days. Basically, there are 16 players, and after this all-play-all stage, the field will be cut in half, just 8 players, and they'll go into quarters and semis and a final. So do check it out. Airthings Masters online. You can see it on Chess24. Thanks for watching.